Order. The House and Committee has resumed for further consideration of the Victims of Crime Reform Bill. Members, before the dinner break, we were debating Part 2, and Andrew Little had the call, and he has 3.5 minutes remaining, should he wish to avail himself.
I do indeed, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, well, Andrew Little.
Thank you for the opportunity to resume what I was saying before I was interrupted by the ever so important dinner bill. And to say, as I was saying about this is a very important area of endeavour, not only for lawmaking but for the conduct of the law and the criminal justice system. And so it's not an area that is taken lightly by this House and the members in it, nor by anybody that I'm aware of, not the least, of course, the victims who are affected and who benefit from the laws and the improvements that we make in it from time to time. But it also is an area of the law that requires a champion in the form of the Minister of Justice, who is beyond reproach and conducts themselves with considerable integrity. The victims look to our justice system, our criminal justice system, for their share of justice, if you like, that their interests and their cause is heard by the courts, is taken into account when criminal matters are being disposed of. And so this is a very crucial area. And we should ask the question, what if somebody holding public office were themselves to be convicted of a designated crime, a crime that the Commissioner of Police said ought to be one of those affected by this piece of legislation? And then who is the victim? Who is the victim of somebody who commits a crime in public office or who misconducts themselves in public office? Well, it's the people of New Zealand. And so we need to make sure that when we are making rules for every other citizen, those who transgress the law and those who are victims of those transgressions, that we are ourselves people of principle and we operate with integrity. Now, with that in mind, Mr. Chairman, I come to Part 2 and these provisions here, and these relate to the Children, Young Persons and Their Families Act, to the extent that, those parts of that legislation that cover the administration of justice for young people and children who commit crimes or at least have allegations of offences made against them. And this part of these changes extend victims' rights to those who are victims of crimes committed by children. And that is right. And so when the youth court is dealing with young people, and when the issue of, for example, them being considered for bail is considered by the court, then it is right that victims of that criminal offending should know about it and should have a say on that, because they are the ones who've been affected. And even though it is a bail hearing and the issue of guilt or non-guilt is yet to be determined, there's not an issue of conviction being entered, nevertheless, generally speaking, by that time, the issue is not whether the person before the court has not done anything wrong. That usually is clear. It's whether or not, of course, they are guilty of the specified offence and the elements of the offence have been made out and therefore a conviction entered. But even at the bail stage, when all that there is an allegation or a charging document laid, it is still, Mr. Chairman,
Andrew Little.
It is still appropriate for the victim of an offence in those circumstances to be heard and their rights, their views and their interests considered. So we accept that, and we think that this makes a reasonable addition to the rights that the primary legislation provides for. The next significant change is there's the right to attend the family group conference, and this allows the victim of an offence to attend or to be represented at a family group conference dealing with a young offender. And again, that also is an appropriate measure. And for a government who creditably has been doing good things in relation to restorative justice, this is effectively a restorative justice measure. Now, the Sensible Sentencing Trust is not a fan of restorative justice, and there is a story, of course, about an offshoot of the Sensible Sentencing Trust meeting in a hotel last year at the same time as the National Conference on Restorative Justice was being held, and that offshoot of the Sensible Sentencing Trust approached the hotel management and instructed the hotel management that if the folks who were meeting in the hotel about restorative justice were not evicted from the hotel, did not have their meeting shut down, then this offshoot group would themselves leave the hotel and would not be paying their bill. Now, it's a bit sad that a victims advocacy organisation and its offshoot should take that attitude towards it. Our view is very clear. Whether or not a victim participates in a restorative justice process is a matter for the victim, because it isn't just about the perpetrator of the crime, it is about the victim having an opportunity to confront the perpetrator of the crime against them, an opportunity to come to terms with the offending, and for themselves to understand. People I've spoken to, victims I've spoken to, who've been through a restorative justice process, have said that usually their expectations are exceeded. And so it is right that for adult offenders for whom this process is available, that for victims of young offenders, that they should also have the opportunity to participate in those processes that are about trying to get the young person back on track and hopefully avoiding a recurrence. And if there are underlying problems, social or health-wise or other, then that is an opportunity, an early intervention that can take place. And why should not the victim have something to say about that? Why should not a young offender be able to hear from a victim in a controlled setting about the impact of the offending on them? And so that is a worthwhile and good measure and clause 36 of this bill, and we support it. And then the other significant change is in relation to one other aspect, which I shall name shortly when I see it. And that is the provision in relation to what happens when a youth offender or a young offender goes through the system and the matter is disposed of, ensuring that victims are kept apprised of that. If they are to be further processed in the criminal justice system, or if having been processed they are then to be released on any conditions, that the victim of that young offender is to be notified as well. Sadly, also, if a young offender who has been detained in a facility, whether it's a prison or whether it's a youth facility, if they die during the course of that, then the victim is to be notified of that as well. And that is a tragic occurrence that happens occasionally, and hopefully not too often. So, Mr. Chairman, as my colleagues have said in relation to the other parts of the bill, this does make good and important changes for the administration of justice and for victims, and we support it. And this particular part that deals with young offenders and young offending and the victims of them, these are useful changes that I think will go some way to addressing our criminal offending rate and helping the fate of young offenders and stopping them graduating onto harsher offending through the involvement of the victim and their victims in the processes set up to deal with them.
Mr. Chair.
Paul Foster-Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a pleasure to rise and take a brief call in this committee stage consideration of the Victims of Crime Reform Bill. Sir,